but the radio operator spotted the Emden's bogus fourth funnel and put out a call for help. The Australian cruiser Sydney picked up the message and ended the Emden's maverick career. Captain Muller was taken prisoner. He and the other survivors were well looked after.
Dear loved ones, I'm well and healthy. The British were very friendly. They took loads of photos of us and asked for our addresses to send us the snaps. Yours, Walter.
Now, Admiral Graf von Spee's luck also ran out. Britain took the risk of detaching 2 of her latest battlecruisers from the crucial North Sea blockade of Germany to deal with him. On the 8th of December 1914, German commander Hans Pochhammer sighted their huge masts as they recoaled in Port Stanley on the Falkland Islands. He realized the Germans were outgunned and outpaced.
We choked a little at the neck. Our throats contracted and stiffened. For that meant a life and death grapple, or rather a fight ending in honorable death.
The German fleet tried to get away, but the British battlecruisers were too fast. At 1:25 p.m, Spee turned to face them. But the British were careful to stay out of range of his guns, firing their own from 16,000 yards. Lieutenant Harry Bennett on HMS Canopus watched what happened and painted these watercolours. At 4:17 p.m, the Scharnhorst went down with Admiral von Spee and all hands. At 6:02 p.m, the Gneisenau sank with most of its crew, including Spee's younger son Heinrich. His other son Otto was on the doomed Nuremberg.
The sight was one of fearful awe. She turned over and sank with a graceful gliding motion, as would a tumbler pressed over in a bowl of water. Those who went down in her were game to the end, for we saw a party of her men standing on the quarterdeck, waving the German ensign as she sank, and so they went down into their watery grave.
The Battle of the Falklands heralded the end of Germany's cruiser campaign. Her global war would increasingly have to be fought on land. Again, her commanders would stretch slim resources to lead the British Empire a dance. The Suez Canal presented a rare opportunity for Germany to harass the British Empire. A crucial British sea lane, vulnerable to attack by land forces. But Germany couldn't spare any men from the Western Front, so Berlin turned to Ottoman Turkey, her ally since November 1914. The Turkish Fourth Army was stationed in Palestine, just 150 miles from the Suez Canal. The Turks agreed to help capture Suez, assigning these 19,000 troops. They saw it as the first stage in their own reconquest of Egypt and Libya.
We marched at night and only by moonlight. My heart was filled with a deep melancholy, mingled with great hope of success. At the sound of the song, the red flag flies over Cairo, to the accompaniment of which the advancing battalions forged ahead over the endless waste of desert, feebly illuminated by the pale gleam of the waxing moon.
The Turks had to transport howitzers, floating pontoons, food and water across the Sinai Desert, and didn't lose a single man. In the early hours of the 3rd of February 1915, they reached the Suez Canal. The German colonel who had planned the operation now watched it go horribly wrong.
A sentry noticed our attack and fired. The shots created panic. The English then blasted the banks with machine gun fire.
The Turks found the canal defended by 9 British warships and 30,000 Indian troops dug into defensive positions. The Ottoman troops suffered 1,200 casualties. The survivors retreated across the desert. The attack had failed, but Africa was now a battleground in Germany's global war. She had 3 bases of operations: the Cameroons, Germany East Africa, where Letov was still at large, and German Southwest Africa with its ports and wireless stations. Luckily for Britain, she had a colony right next door. Unluckily, it was the one whose loyalty she could least rely on. The Union of South Africa was racially diverse. Blacks, Boers, and British settlers. Just 15 years before, Britain had fought a long, bloody war against the Boers. Many still had little love for Britain. Their loyalty could not be counted on. As one commander told South Africa's Prime Minister, Louis Botha,
"My men are ready. Whom do we fight? The English or the Germans?"
But South Africa was ideally situated to launch an attack on German Southwest Africa. British Colonial Secretary Louis Harcourt took the gamble.
If your ministers desire and feel themselves able to seize such part of German Southwest Africa as will give them the command of the wireless stations there, we should feel this was a great and urgent imperial service.
South Africa's government readily agreed because it had many imperial ambitions of its own. It wanted to seize German Southwest for itself. On the 14th of September 1914, South African forces crossed the Orange River into German Southwest. But the Germans were one jump ahead, as the South Africans found out when they paused at the watering hole of Sandfontein. The South Africans were beaten, but there was worse to come. Part of South Africa now rose up in armed rebellion. Commanding the forces in the Northern Cape was Manie Maritz. Fearless and uncompromising, Maritz had fought a vicious guerrilla campaign against Britain in the Boer War. His sympathies lay entirely with Germany.
I received a telegram ordering me to take a large commando into German Southwest Africa. I was determined not to fight on behalf of the British Empire, and my officers and troops were in full accord with me.
In October 1914, Manie Maritz crossed the Orange River into German territory at Squeet Drift to enlist German support. Two days later, Maritz addressed his troops under this tree.
Now, men, we don't want to be ruled by the Jews and the financiers of England. General Beyers, General de Wet and myself have decided to form an independent South African Republic and have entered into an agreement with the governor of German Southwest Africa. They will provide us with arms and ammunition, guns. On this step depends the freedom of the masses of the country.
Britain's request for help had brought her dominion to the brink of civil war. In London, the Colonial Secretary Lewis Harcourt feared the breakup of the Union of South Africa. He secretly ordered 30,000 Australian soldiers diverted to the Cape to smother the rebellion.
Safety of the Union is first and paramount consideration. We attach no importance to German Southwest Africa in comparison.
The Australians weren't needed. In the winter of 1914, the loyal South Africans defeated the Boer rebels. This is rare film of 50 of them being led to trial in Cape Town. But they never caught Mani Moritz. By July 1915, South Africa cornered the Germans, forced their surrender, and annexed their colony. And Britain had more work for South Africa, north this time, to deal once and for all with von Lettow. London turned to South Africa's defence minister to lead the campaign, Jannie Smuts. Smuts too had fought in the Boer War, but was now passionately pro-British. More a statesman than a soldier, Smuts made an indifferent general of conventional forces. And he was up against Lettow. British officer Richard Meinertzhagen was now Smuts' intelligence officer.
Smuts is quite determined to avoid a stand-up fight. He told me he could not afford to go back to South Africa with the nickname Butcher Smuts. If von Lettow is clever and Smuts not clever enough, there's going to be trouble.
Lettow was clever. Here, at his headquarters at Moshi railway station, he thought through the idea of depriving Britain of manpower in Europe by opening up the war in Africa.
The question was, could we, with our small forces, prevent considerable numbers of the enemy from intervening in Europe?